forest held itself still that night, as if every root and branch sensed a storm moving in. Moonlight, cold and sharp, like a blade honed on bone, sliced through the towering pines and painted the ground in fractured streaks of silver. For 5 long years, this quiet had been Niriel's refuge. Here she wasn't the shamed Omega, the mute girl, whose wolf had never stirred. Out here, she was simply a guardian, an unseen ghost moving through the timberline. Her voice was nothing more than a soft hum, the only lullaby the 3 orphaned pups had ever known. They slept tucked inside the hollow of a lightning-scarred oak, their tiny breaths threading into her heartbeat the scent of milk and wild earth, anchoring wounds she could never speak aloud. But tonight the moon didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like a predator. Its pale stare pinned her like prey. A tremor jolted the smallest pup, Zion. His fur white as early frost, whimpered tiny paws, twitching as if chasing down dream-born rabbits. Niriel brushed a gentle hand along his spine, her silent touch steadying him. She knew every heartbeat these pups carried, as if they were her own. She could read them without words. Ruko sprawled on his back, fearless even in sleep, already carrying the swagger of a future alpha. Mia, ever cautious, curled tight in a guarded knot beside him. They were her world. 3 abandoned souls left at the edge of the blighted woods, a secret she protected with a fierceness that surprised even her. Her silence, once the mark of that fire-torn night when smoke and terror devoured her voice, had become her armor. No one could track someone who spoke nothing at all. But even armor cracks when the enemy it was forged for finally returns. And tonight, the air tasted like destiny shifting. Zion stirred again, no longer dreaming. His small black nose twitched, catching a scent Niriel couldn't detect. His eyes, dark as riverstone after rain, opened wide, filled with an instinct no pup his age should understand. He stumbled to his paws, wobbling out from his sibling's warmth. Niriel reached for him, a breathy, broken sound rising in her throat, nothing more than air shaped by longing. Easy, little one. The night is safe. But Zion didn't hear her. He lifted his head into the merciless moonlight. His tiny chest expanded, an impossible gathering of power. And then he released a sound that tore the forest wide open. Not a yip, not a frightened cry, a howl, pure, ancient, resonant enough to make the trees themselves lean in. A summons, a declaration, a beacon hurled into the heart of the night. And something answered. The earth didn't simply shudder, it groaned. A deep vibration rattled through Niriel's worn leather boots and climbed her spine. The scent hit next. Ozone, burned ember, smoke-kissed iron. The scent she had prayed never to face again. The Alpha King's army. The night her village burned. The night her voice died in her throat. The night everything ended. Panic, cold and merciless, sliced through her. She lunged for Zion, clutching his trembling body. He went limp as if the power had drained out of him as quickly as it came. Ruko and Maya pressed against her legs, their small whines trembling with fear. She had to run. She had to vanish. She had survived this long by never being seen. But her feet wouldn't move. The forest, once her ally, closed in around her, like bars of a cage. The pines seemed to shift their skeletal limbs, pointing toward the clearing as mist crawled in, thick as wolf fur. It twisted into a shape too tall, too broad, too still to be anything natural. Then he stepped out of it. Silence crushed the world. Crickets died mid-song. The wind folded into nothing. Even the pups froze, their cries strangled. The figure was carved from shadow and legend, larger than any shifter she had ever known. And Niriel knew before her mind formed the thought Cadrix had found her. Broad shoulders were wrapped in a cloak of black fur that seemed to swallow the moonlight whole. The leather armor beneath was carved with scars earned from 100 battles. A jagged silver line cut from his left temple to the angle of his jaw, a stark river slashing across the brutal landscape of his face. He moved with a lethal kind of grace, the kind only predators owned. Every step landed with deliberate precision, silent on the damp forest floor. But it was his scent that shattered her. Pine and smoke, yes. But beneath it, the crackling force of a storm caged behind skin, the metallic echo of old blood, and a dark masculine power that spoke of ancient lineage and absolute rule. It was the scent from her nightmares, the scent of the conqueror. Then he lifted his head, and his eyes found her. They were not human eyes. They were gold-molten burning gold, bright enough to peel her open from the inside out. His gaze sliced through her ragged clothes, her snow-pale hair, straight into the terror locked in her chest. He looked at her for only a heartbeat before his attention dropped to the pups crouched at her feet. A muscle jumped in his jaw. The oppressive weight of his power tightened, sharpening into something territorial, something wounded. He stepped forward and Raya flinched, pulling Zion tighter against her chest. Her small frame braced itself in front of the lives she protected with everything she had. She met his stare, defiance and fear battling in her moonlit eyes. She had no voice, but her entire soul hurled a single word at him: no. He halted, his golden gaze rising back to her face. His eyes dragged along the line of her jaw, the fall of her white hair, the fierce, unwavering stance she held despite trembling. For a brief moment, the raw power in his expression wavered, replaced by stunned, disbelieving recognition. As if he were staring at someone torn from a grave. His voice, when it finally emerged, wasn't loud. It rumbled low and deep, vibrating straight through the earth, into her bones, a sound that bypassed her ears entirely and embedded itself into her very soul. "They're my blood," he said. The words carried the finality of a king delivering truth. Raya's world lurched sideways. The pups she'd saved her orphans. Her family belonged to the monster who had destroyed everything she once knew. The revelation struck like a physical blow, ripping the air from her lungs. Her quiet life, her tiny sanctuary built on the sharpest lie imaginable. She had been raising the kin of her destroyer. He stepped closer, closing the space between them until he was only an arm's reach away. Heat radiated off him and his scent rolled over her like a drug too potent, too consuming. He stood so near, she could see darker flecks swirling in his gold irises. A faint tremor shook his scarred hand where it hung at his side. And now his gaze locked fully on hers, storming with emotions she couldn't unravel. Rage, grief, disbelief. And something else. Something primal. Something terrifying. He studied her as though starving for the sight of her, memorizing a face he believed he'd lost long ago. His throat tightened. When he spoke again, it wasn't a decree, but a raw, broken whisper that shattered everything she thought true. "And you?" He breathed, golden eyes burning into hers. "You're my stolen mate." The words froze the night. More shocking than the pup's howl, more devastating than the earth's tremor. My stolen mate. Raya's mind recoiled, panic clawing through her veins. A mistake. A cruel lie meant to break what little she had left. Mates were a fairy tale for someone like her. A mute omega, whose wolf had died the night her voice was taken. She was nothing. Less than nothing. How could she possibly be the fated half of him, Kadric's Alpha King? A name whispered like a curse. A force of nature who united the territories beneath a blood-soaked banner. A wolf whose power was said to rival the moon that birthed their kind. And he looked at her, not as a conqueror looks at a captive, but like a starving man, seeing the only thing that could save him. The hunger in his golden eyes was a violation. A claim she never asked for. A truth she could not escape. Stripping away the 5 years of isolation she had wrapped around herself like armor. She stumbled back a half step, her bare foot catching on a root. The sudden jolt rocked Zion in her arms. The pup let out a soft cry and burrowed his face against the curve of her neck. That familiar weight, that small warmth, trusting her without question, was the only thing anchoring her against the storm of Kadrix's presence. Ruko and Maya edged closer, their tiny bodies trembling, offering what little defense their growls could muster against the titan looming before them. "You don't remember," Kadrix said. His voice didn't question it, diagnosed a wound carved deep into her soul. The harsh rumble from earlier had vanished. In its place lay a tone thick with pain, so raw it felt like the air itself absorbed it. He stepped forward slowly, hands held open in a gesture meant to soothe, even though every inch of him radiated danger. The fire, the smoke, Gebuk. It took more than your voice, didn't it? Every muscle in Nirael's body screamed at her to run, to gather the pups and disappear into the twisted maze of trees that had always sheltered her. But his gaze locked her in place. It was like standing in the eye of a storm, his sheer will pressing down on her, a weight she could feel in her bones. His scent wrapped around her, again pine, old embers, and that powerful masculine musk that awakened something buried and unwanted deep within her. Something soft and feminine she thought had died long ago. It terrified her. It tempted her. Her mind hissed monster, but a forgotten instinct deep in her belly whispered, "Mine." He saw the war in her eyes, and for a heartbeat something like hope or desperation flickered across his scarred face. "My name is Kadrix," he said, like he was introducing himself to a stranger, as if they weren't standing in a moonlit clearing filled with ghosts. "We met before the flames, before my crown. Do you remember a market by the river? A vendor selling moon petal charms?" The words slid through her mind like broken glass, pieces of a life that wasn't hers. The only market she remembered was the one left in ashes. The only river she knew was the one she crossed fleeing his army. She shook her head sharply. The motion sent her white hair tumbling across her shoulders, stark against the dark woods. His golden eyes tracked that movement, and his jaw tightened. "You wore your hair in a braid," he murmured, voice dipping into a memory she couldn't reach, threaded with bluebells. "You laughed, and it sounded like wind chimes." The image was so foreign, so impossible, that breathless, soundless hysteria swelled in her chest. Laughter, wind chimes. He had to be mad or chasing a ghost with her face. He saw the disbelief, the fear sharpening into defiance. He exhaled slowly, the sound heavy enough to carry the weight of an entire kingdom. His gaze fell to the pups, and the predator in him softened into something else entirely. Pity, grief. "They are my brother's children," he said, his voice regaining its regal steel, though grief pulsed beneath it. His name was Betrayal. He and Salen were betrayed, killed by those who wanted my throne. His jaw hardened. They tried to erase our bloodline by abandoning the pups in the blighted woods left for the frost or the beasts. He lifted his gaze back to her, and the gratitude there was a force all its own. "But they found you. The moon led them to their lost queen." Queen! The word hit her like a blow. She clutched Zion tighter, her knuckles white. She wasn't a queen. She was a scavenger living on the bones of the world. A hermit. A keeper of orphans. Nothing more. I've searched for them since the moment I learned of Betrayal's death. Kadrix continued, his tone hard again, steel slipping back into place. I felt their lineage on the wind, a faint echo. But tonight... His eyes fell to Zion, nestled in her arms. Tonight the pup howled with the voice of my ancestors' pure royal blood, no bearer of the soul-marred gift could ignore. It was a beacon. It led me here. To them. To you. He took another step, and this time Nirael didn't retreat. She stood her ground, a silent feral guardian, shielding her young. Let him be a king. Let them be his bloodline. They were hers. She had found them half frozen and dying. She had warmed them with her own body, chewed their food when they were too weak, hummed them through fevers and storms. Her love was the only home they had ever known. Kadrix stopped just beyond her reach. He wasn't looking at her face anymore. His attention was locked on her hands, on the way she held the pup as if he were a piece of her soul. His gaze followed the line of her arm until it stopped at her wrist, where a worn strip of leather held a delicate charm woven from dried moon petals. It was the last thing she owned from her mother, a talisman she had clutched through the night. Everything burned. Its familiar shape had been her only steady companion during the long, wordless years that followed. Cadrix's breath faltered. Slowly, as though dragging air through grief, he raised his hand. It was a large hand forged with scars and calluses, the hand of a king bred for war. Yet his movements were unbearably gentle, giving her every chance to retreat. She didn't move. She stood trapped in the strange reverence burning through his eyes. His fingers brushed her skin, warm and rough. A shock slammed through, her white-hot electric alive. Not an accident, not a trick of cold air. It felt like a dormant circuit inside her had snapped awake. Her heart hammered wildly, pounding against a sudden silence she didn't understand. For the first time in 5 long years, the background buzz of fear and grief, the noise she'd lived with so long, it felt like part of her bones simply vanished. In its place rose something impossible. Recognition, connection, a resonance vibrating through every part of her. The mate bond, real, violent, unmistakable. His thumb traced the fragile charm. The heat of his touch branded her searing and undeniable. The world shrank until only that touch existed, until his scent, pine smoke and heat and something achingly male filled her lungs. His golden eyes locked with hers, ablaze with an ancient certainty. "I know this," he murmured, voice raw. His gaze stayed on the charm, his hand steady on her wrist. "I gave this to you." The words sank deep, turning a hidden key in her mind. "I gave this to you." And everything inside her shuddered. Not a spark in inferno. A memory split the fog of her amnesia. Sunlight dancing over a bustling market. Voices calling over river water. The sweet smell of honey cakes. And a young man, broad-shouldered, golden-eyed, before scars, before crowns. He hadn't been a king then. Just a visiting warrior with a quiet power humming beneath his skin. For luck, a younger voice whispered through the haze. "So the moon will always guide you back to me." Raya jerked her hand away as if scorched. The memory shattered. The charm felt heavier now, a reminder of a life she couldn't fully grasp, and a future she didn't want. The mate bond pulsed between them, a living thing, tightening its hold. But she couldn't let it claim her. She shook her head violently, pale hair whipping around her face. Terror widened her eyes. Terror not of the king, but of being swallowed whole, of losing the fragile identity she'd pieced together from silence and ash. To be his mate meant becoming part of his world fire. Blood. Thrones. The same world that had stolen everything from her. Cadrix saw the refusal in every line of her body. The hope that had briefly warmed his gaze extinguished, replaced by the cold iron resolve of a ruler who had finally found what he'd been hunting. He straightened shoulders, broadening voice, dropping to a command, edged with steel. "You've been surviving in the shadows," he said. "That ends tonight. You are the Alpha Queen. These pups are the heirs of the Southern Reach, his kingdom, his bloodline, his claim. Your place isn't among dirt and leaves," he continued. "It's beside me on the throne." Her old forest, her one sanctuary, suddenly felt unbearably precious. The quiet she lived in, the freedom was slipping through her fingers. She stepped back. Her movements were no longer clumsy. She shifted into a fluid, feral readiness, the instinctive poise of a wild creature preparing to bolt. She adjusted Zion in her arms, the tension in her body coiling tight like a drawn bowstring. Ruko and Maya sensed her gathering panic and moved with her, brushing against her legs, their small bodies trembling as low growls rose in their throats. Cadrix let out a low, humorless breath, a sharp, cutting sound in the quiet place. "Don't believe you can outrun me, little moon shadow," he said softly. There isn't a single corner of this land I wouldn't scorch to find you again. I lost you once. His golden eyes flickered, tightening. I won't lose you twice. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, every movement controlled. A predator closing not with speed, but with inevitability. Nirael's pulse thundered against her ribs. She scanned the clearing in desperation, searching for any path out, but every shadow felt filled with his presence. Every tree felt like an extension of his will. The forest, her refuge for years, now felt like it had turned on her. They need a pack, he said. His gaze fell to the pups, softening only a fraction. They need training, protection. They need their birthright. And you, his voice gentled, just for a fleeting second you can give them love. And you have, his tone hardened again. But you can't teach them to command earth and sky the way a Solmar wolf must. I can. It wasn't arrogance. It was truth. And that truth stabbed deep. She'd seen the raw power in Xion's howl. She'd felt the ground shift in response. What future could she offer them? A life of hiding in hollowed trees. Always hungry, always afraid, always running. She could love them, but love alone wouldn't shield them from the brutal legacy in their blood. He came closer, so close she could feel the heat of him, smell pine storm fire and the dominance embedded in his skin. He didn't reach for her. He knelt. The motion struck her like a physical blow. The great Alpha King Conqueror, war-born ruler of nations, dropped to one knee in the damp earth before her. A silent, wolfless Omega. His head bowed, but his golden eyes lifted, stripped of command, carrying nothing but raw, aching need. Nirael, he breathed her name, spoken like a prayer and a mourning song. 5 years, he whispered. For 5 years, I have ruled a kingdom made of ash and ghosts. Every day the bond has felt like a missing limb, an ache for a soul I thought died in the flames. He pressed a fist to his chest. I've been a king walking around with half a heart. His voice roughened with something painfully human. I won't chain you. I won't drag you from this forest. He leaned forward slightly, the plea exposed and unguarded. But I'm begging you, come home. Let me mend what was broken. Let me give you back the life that was stolen. His vulnerability was a sharper weapon than any blade. It sliced through her defenses, slipped past years of fear, bitterness, and solitude, and struck the hollow places inside her. Because for 5 years, she had been a ghost too. Alive, but not living. Breathing, but not whole. Slowly she looked at the pups. Xion's wide eyes were fixed on Cadrix, not with fear, but with some strange instinctive recognition. Maya stayed pressed to Nirael's leg, wary, but her growling had faded to a soft, uncertain whine. It was Ruko, the fearless one, who stepped forward first. He moved away from the safety of Nirael's legs, his tail giving a hesitant wag. He sniffed the air, then nudged his nose against the king's armored knee. Cadrix didn't move at first. Then with deliberate gentleness he lifted his scarred hand and lowered it, letting the pup decide. Ruko licked his knuckles, a sign of submission, a sign of acceptance. An alpha pup recognizing his alpha king. The sight cracked something inside Nirael. The last of her resistance crumbled. Not because of the king's power, but because of the unshakable truth staring her in the face. A family was being pulled back together. She was their mother in spirit. But he was their blood, their lineage, their destiny. To keep them from him would be another kind of cruelty, a selfishness born of fear. Her eyes lifted to meet his over Ruko's small head, and everything inside her trembled. The unspoken question in her eyes was unmistakable. Will you keep them safe? Will they truly be protected? His reply wasn't given in words, it flared in his gaze, a fierce vow blazing in those molten gold eyes. He would burn down the world before he let harm touch them. With a slow, trembling exhale that felt like surrendering a war she'd fought alone for years, Raya gave a small, deliberate nod. Relief swept over Cadrix's face so powerfully that for a heartbeat he looked almost young, as if the years of loss had lifted from his shoulders. He rose in one smooth motion, the king once more, though something gentler now lived in his expression. He extended his hand, palm open, a promise laid bare. "The road ahead won't be gentle," he warned, voice low and edged with truth. "My court is a nest of waiting vipers, all too comfortable with a widowed king without an heir. They'll see you as a threat, a silent, wolfless omega dragging my brother's pups at her heels." His eyes hardened. "They'll test you. They'll try to break you. A beat. Let them try." Nirael's gaze drifted from his outstretched hand to his face. The path he offered was thorned and treacherous, leading her from the quiet, moonlit safety of her forest into the glittering jaws of his court. But for the first time in 5 years, she wouldn't be walking alone. Her fingers tightened around the faded moon petal charm, and with hesitance, carved from fear and hope alike, she set her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, strong, irrevocable. Not a capture, a homecoming. The journey from her woodland sanctuary to Cadrix's fortress blurred into a rush of motion and sensation. They didn't walk. Cadrix guided her to the tree line with a hand on her back, a touch that sent both nerves and strange comfort threading through her thin tunic. 2 royal guards stood waiting, massive and unmoving as carved stone. Their armor was dark, dried blood red, and when their eyes flicked to her, the shock was unmistakable. She looked wild, feral-scarred, and in her arms were pups, marked with the unmistakable silver streaks of Betrayal's bloodline. One guard, broad-scarred grim, stepped forward. "My king," he began, voice low with warning. Cadrix cut him off with a single sharp motion. "She is with me, Torvin," he said. "She is the queen." The title dropped like a hammer. Torvin's eyes widened. He studied Nirael again, this time with dawning, incredulous respect, then dipped into a deep bow that sent unease crawling up her spine. Cadrix shifted, then bones cracking tendons, stretching the sound raw enough to make the pups whine. In a heartbeat, the king vanished, replaced by a massive wolf of obsidian fur, streaked with silver. Those golden eyes remained unchanged, powerful, intelligent, commanding. He nudged her wrist with his enormous muzzle, a silent command. "Trust me." The journey that followed was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Cadrix moved through the forest as if born from its shadows, a fluid force of nature. Nirael clung to his broad back, Zion, tucked securely against her body, while Torvin now shifted into a wolf of steel-gray fur, held Maya and Ruko with effortless strength. The world raced by in a tunnel of moonlight and blackened trunks. Wind tore through her pale hair. It was terrifying. It was electrifying. This was true alpha power, raw and contained, impossible to deny. They reached the onyx citadel just as the first bruised glow of dawn crept across the sky. The fortress looked carved straight from the mountain's heart, its jagged black spires clawing at the clouds. The walls swallowed the light, radiating unyielding strength and ancient sorrow. As the iron gates groaned open, new scents slammed into Nirael's stone steel heavy oils, and underneath it all, something venomous, the metallic tang of ambition. Whispers rose the moment they entered. Servants froze mid-step. Courtiers stumbled. Everywhere, shocked eyes followed the colossal wolf with the wild-haired woman clinging to him and the pups, bearing the unmistakable silver blood of the Solmer line. The murmurs slithered through the halls, wolfless. A mute. She still wears rags. She smells like the forest. Is she a breeder? A stand-in for the lost heirs? Each whispered, blow cut deep. She hunched her shoulders, pulling the pups close. Their voices echoed in her ribs in the fragile silence she had lived in for years. She forgot how cruel the pack could be, how quick the strong were to tear at the weak. In her forest she had been a guardian. Here she was a curiosity, a flaw in the court's brutal tapestry. Cadrix, now in human form, again ignored the whispers entirely, perhaps simply deemed them irrelevant. He led her not toward the throne room, but through narrow, quieter corridors, up spiraling steps into a high tower. The chambers awaiting her were expansive, warm fire, roaring firs thick as clouds, a balcony overlooking the entire kingdom. Mountains, a world she had never imagined, a world she was now expected to rule. It was still a cage, no matter how much gold gleamed on the bars. "You'll be safe here," Cadrix said quietly, his voice gentler now that the doors had closed behind them. "No one enters without my leave." He motioned toward the silent maids who slipped in behind them, Cirrus Lumi, and Raya heads bowed movements trained and precise. "They'll bring you food, clothes, whatever you need." Nereal slid from his back, her legs unsteady beneath her. She clutched Zion and pressed her body protectively around Ruko and Maya. Her forest-born pups were the only familiar warmth in this cold fortress carved from stone and silence. When she looked at the maid's carefully blank expressions, she saw not kindness, only scrutiny. She shook her head and instinctively retreated until her spine hit the icy wall. Frustration flickered through Cadrix's expression. "You cannot live in rags, Nereal. You are a queen." At that she met his gaze, really met it, and for the first time allowed the full, sharp weight of her wordless fury to show. "You dragged me here, to this den of blades and whispers. You call me queen, but I am still the same shattered thing you found beneath the trees." A crown doesn't mend broken bones or a broken soul. He understood. The stubborn irritation in his eyes faded, replaced by something older and far more exhausted. With a flick of his hand, he dismissed the maids. "Very well," he said. "We'll do this your way, your pace." He lowered himself to the floor, turning his attention to the pups, now tumbling from her arms, exploring their new surroundings with cautious excitement. He held still while they sniffed him, stepped on his boots and pawed at his hands. His massive presence seemed to steady them. "They need names," he murmured, stroking Ruko's fur. "Pack names. Betrayal's line won't be forgotten." Nereal watched him, this king who commanded legions, kneeling in furs, letting pups climb across him. The sight was disorienting. The contrast between the ruthless monarch she feared and the alpha born to protect was too stark, too human, too dangerous. Hatred was easier. Understanding could ruin her. Cold seeped into her bones, so she drifted toward the hearth. Its warmth licked at her skin, but it couldn't chase away the ache coiled deep inside her. From the corner of her vision, she saw Cadrix rise and cross to a carved chest at the end of the enormous bed. Cedar and old leather scented the air as he lifted the lid. He dug inside for a moment before pulling out a small wooden box. He didn't force it into her hands. He simply set it on the mantel beside her. "This belonged to my mother," he said, his voice low. "Elindra wasn't a warrior. Her wolf was gentle, more healer than fighter. The court mocked her for it." His jaw clenched, but his voice softened. "They called her the Doe Queen, but my father adored her." He said her quiet strength kept his fury from consuming him. Nereal's gaze drifted to the box, simple, elegant, inlaid with a silver wolf, howling at a pearl-white moon. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. Cadrix's voice rumbled softly beside her. "She understood silence," he said. "She used to tell me that words can be a shield for lies. The real truths are the ones you feel, not the ones you speak." His reflection met hers in the polished silver hanging above the hearth. He didn't look at her like a king judging an omega. He looked at her like a man desperate to understand the woman fate had torn from him. With hesitant fingers, Nereal opened the box. Inside wasn't jewelry, not a crown, but a small slate tablet and a piece of chalk nestled on worn velvet. A faint, soundless gasp escaped her lips. A way to speak. A way to reclaim what the fire stole. A way to answer him. A way to carve herself back into the world. Her eyes burned with tears she hadn't allowed in 5 long years. It was simple. It was priceless. It was a voice. Her fingers trembled so violently, she could barely grip the chalk. She stared at the blank slate, at Cadrix's waiting face, at the pups curled around her feet. What would her first words be? Thank you, who are you? Why me? Her hand moved. The chalk scraped across the slate, a harsh echoing sound after so many years of silence. She didn't write gratitude. She didn't write fear. She wrote a demand, sharp, defiant, trembling why. The first stone in whatever life came next. She held the slate up for him to read. Teach me. 2 stark white words on black stone, simple, sharp, and defiant. A challenge, a promise, and a declaration of war. Not against him, Cadrix realized, but against the helplessness that had been forced onto her life. Against the silence that had been used to cage her. Respect, unexpected and fierce, cut through the possessive pull of the mate bond. This wasn't a timid Omega to shield from the world. This was a queen waking from a 5-year spell of grief. Everything he vowed. His voice rolled through the chamber like a solemn oath sworn to the moon itself. I'll show you everything. The court. The pack. How to command a room without saying a word. How to make your silence a blade instead of armor. And I'll teach you about us. About what we are. The days that followed settled into a strange, uneasy routine. Mornings belonged to the pups Zion, Ruko, and Maya, who followed Raya everywhere, tugging at her tunic and dozing against her legs. She was their home base, their calm center in a fortress filled with sharp angles and sharper people. But afternoons and nights belonged to Cadrix. He kept his promise. He became her guide, her historian, her reluctant confessor. Using the slate, Raya asked the questions that had burned inside her for years. She wrote of fire, of screams, of a village swallowed whole by flame. Her chalk strokes were jagged, trembling with rage she could not speak aloud. Cadrix read each word with a face carved from stone. Not once did he offer excuses. Not once did he hide behind pretty lies. It was a rebellion, he said, voice harsh with old fury. Lord Morvac of North Ridge refused my peace treaty when I united the territories. Your village was loyal to him. He used them as a barricade, sacrificed them to slow my soldiers. He paced the chamber like a beast fighting the urge to break free. The fire was his. A scorched earth tactic. He burned his own people to frame me for slaughter and to ignite a civil war. He paused, breathing hard. When we broke through his lines, everything was ash. We found you in the ruins of the healer's hut, barely alive, your throat destroyed by smoke. He swallowed the memory, cutting him open again. Your wolf retreated from the trauma. The healer said you'd never speak. And then during the next battle, you vanished. I searched for you. I sent the best trackers across every border, but it was as if you were swallowed by the earth. His voice broke. For 5 years, I mourned a mate I believed dead. The truth hit her like cold water. Her hatred, clean, focused, familiar, began to fracture. The monster she had blamed wasn't the one who burned her world. The line between victim and enemy blurred into something painful and confusing. Still, Cadrix didn't stop. He shifted to teaching her the politics of the court, the snakes waiting behind jeweled smiles. He drew alliances across the back of a discarded map, Valus, the black-haired beauty with ambition, sharpened like a dagger. Zarek, the silver-tongued power broker, with a treasury full of secrets. Torvin, his second in command, loyal to the crown, but deeply suspicious of Narael. They see your silence as a liability, Cadrix said, his finger tapping a cluster of border factions. A wolfless queen threatens their power. They don't know that the pups are Drails. For now, let them assume they're yours. The cold realization slid down Nirael's spine. He was using her and the pups as bait. It should have angered her. Instead, a hard practical part of her understood. Survival here wasn't about strength, it was strategy. And she was the most unpredictable piece on the board. Tension thickened in the citadel with every passing day, reaching a boiling point when the blood moon hunt was announced. An ancient ritual. A night under a crimson eclipse, where ranks were challenged, power decided, and every wolf, alpha or not, revealed their true nature beneath the red sky. Cadrix announced that tonight he would present his queen to the court. Under his watch, the maids no longer looming specters dressed, Nirael in a gown the color of deep midnight, its fabric cool and sleek as still water. It was free of jewels, free of ornamentation, yet it fit her like it had been stitched from moonlight itself. In the polished silver of the mirror, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not the dirt-stained hermit of the blighted woods. Not the trembling girl who crawled from the ashes. This was someone new. Someone carved from silent shadow and survival. A queen born from ruin. When she entered the great hall on Cadrix's arm, a hush swept through the chamber like a cold wind. Hundreds of torches flickered against stone walls, shadows swaying like restless spirits. Every gaze locked on her, heavy with curiosity. Doubt, fear. She could read their sense, sharp judgment, disbelief, resentment. And from the crimson-clad corner where Vela stood, she caught another scent entirely venom, pure and suffocating. Cadrix led her to the twin thrones perched atop the stone dais. He didn't sit. He stood tall, one hand on the pommel of his sword, power radiating from him in waves. Tonight, beneath the blood moon, we mark the strength of this pack, he declared, his voice rolling through the vaulted hall. For 5 years, this throne has stood with a shadow beside it. No longer. He turned slightly, the room holding its breath. I present Nirael. Lost to me, returned to me. My mate, your queen. A ripple of shock swept the hall. Vela stepped forward, the movement smooth and predatory, her smile a blade disguised as silk. A touching speech, my king, she purred, her tone syrupy with false respect. But a queen must be more than decoration. A queen must be strong. Her wolf must be strong. We have seen no wolf, no voice. How do we know she isn't flawed, a barren vessel unworthy of a true alpha heir? The insult struck like a blade slid between ribs. Nirael felt all warmth drain from her skin. Beside her, Cadrix went rigid, a low growl vibrating beneath his breath. His fury was an animal straining at its chains. Before he could unleash it, Nirael moved. She remembered his lesson. Make your silence a weapon. Her hand pressed against his arm, calm, steady, commanding him to stand down. The entire court froze. She descended the dais with deliberate grace, her midnight gown gliding behind her like spilled ink. She walked directly toward Velas. For the first time, the she-wolf's smile wavered. Nirael stopped just a breath away, close enough to strike, close enough to stare directly into Velas's cold, malicious eyes. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was a blade pressed to the throat. It screamed louder than any roar, I do not fear you. Your words are nothing. I survived fire. I survived abandonment. I survived a world determined to break me. You're just noise. Velas held her stare, until she couldn't. Her gaze darted aside just a fraction, but enough. The court gasped. The wolfless Omega had just dominated one of the fiercest alphas in the kingdom without lifting a finger. A slow, lethal smile curved Nirael's lips. She turned her back on Velas, a gesture of utter dismissal, and walked toward the throne. But halfway up the dais, agony tore through her. A burning shock radiated from the moon-petal charm around her wrist, a pain so fierce it felt like her soul was being ripped open. A sound, voiceless, broken, escaped her as she collapsed to her knees. Cadrix was beside her, instantly terror carved into his face. Nirael. What's happening? Across the hall, Valus laughed. A cruel, triumphant sound that echoed like a crack in the stone. In her grip glinted a small black-edged blade, the tip slick with a strange shimmering fluid. An obsidian shard sat wedged into the hilt like a fragment of night. "Do you see now, my king?" Valus called out, her voice ringing with triumphant cruelty. "A simple severing curse. A bond is only as strong as its weakest point, and yours has snapped." Nirael stared at her wrist. The charm, her mother's charm, the one Cadrix had placed on her, was darkening, cracking, turning to drifting ash. The bond that had anchored her, the warm pulse of connection she had clung to in this chaotic world, was splitting apart, shredding thread by thread. And in the yawning void left behind, something stirred. A faint, desperate movement. Buried deep in the dormant corner of her spirit came the frantic scraping of a wolf, terrified, desperate, clawing at a cage that was moments from collapsing. The pain that swallowed her was total. Not sharp, not physical, something far worse. A tearing of spirit, a ripping of soul. The mate bond, the golden thread woven through every part of her being, was being violently unspooled. Every nerve, every inch of her consciousness screamed. The gentle hum of connection that had been her constant companion since Cadrix's return vanished, replaced by a deafening static void. Worse than 5 years of emptiness. This felt like losing half of herself. Through the haze, she saw Cadrix not as a king, but as raw, feral fury incarnate. His roar exploded through the hall, shaking the stone pillars. His eyes were no longer gold, but blazing cores of solar fire. He lunged for Valus, not to restrain, but to destroy. But Torvin and 2 other guards threw themselves between them, faces carved with grim duty. "My king, no," Torvin rasped, straining against Cadrix's overwhelming strength. "Don't let her goad you into breaking pack law. A challenge must be answered. She cannot be slaughtered on the hall floor." The court erupted. Some cried out for Valus's blood, loyal to their king. Others vipers. Cadrix had warned Nirael about, watched with hungry delight, seeing a king spiraling toward ruin. Valus held her ground, lips curling in triumph. "The curse won't kill her," she taunted, raising her voice above the chaos. "It only cuts away what never should have been. A bond to a wolfless barren Omega. I've done you a service. I've carved out your weakness. Now you're free to choose a real queen, one who can give you an heir." She swept a deliberate glance toward the assembled lords, her allies, who responded with tight, approving nods. Nirael choked on a gasp, curling into herself on the stone floor. The agony faded, but a cold, hollow silence took its place. The bond was simply gone. She reached for Cadrix through the connection that had once lit her spirit. There was nothing, only a wall of dead, suffocating emptiness. And in that brutal silence she heard it. A whisper, a whine, not from the hall, from inside her. "Let me out." A thin, trembling voice, her wolf awakening in terror from a 5-year slumber. The violent trauma had jolted her inner beast like lightning striking a lifeless heart. "The bond is gone. He cannot feel us. We are alone again." The wolf's panic throbbed through her, a creature awakening inside a burning cage. Cadrix, still restrained, turned blazing eyes toward Nirael. His fury collided with something far more desperate, fear. He couldn't feel her. He couldn't sense her pain. To him, she had become a void. A silence, not just of voice, but of soul. The anguish in his expression mirrored the emptiness swallowing her. With a surge of alpha command so powerful it crushed his men to their knees, Cadrix forced Torvin aside. He strode to Nirael and knelt, hands hovering shakily, terrified to touch her. "Nirael." He breathed, raw, shattered. She lifted her head, looking into the face of the man who suddenly felt a universe away. She wanted to reach for him, to say she was still here, but the chasm between them was wide, cold, devastating. "He cannot protect us now," the wolf whimpered inside her. "They will kill us. They will kill the pups." The thought of the pups hit her like ice water. Zion Ruko Gomea. Upstairs, with only a few trusted guards. If Cadrix fell, if Valus and her allies seized control, the heirs would be wiped out first. A new strength surged through Raya. Not born of a bond, but of a mother's feral, unbreakable instinct. She forced herself upright, every limb shaking, but fueled by sheer will. She had to fix this. She had to fight her way out. Forcing herself upright, wobbling on weak legs, she faced Valus. The she-wolf let out a cruel laugh. "Look at that, it's still trying to stand. Pitiful. Your king is bound by law, but I'm not. I challenge you, Omega. Trial by combat." Her smile sharpened. "For the right to be Alpha Queen. Refuse and surrender your claim. You'll be cast out. A death sentence." Nereal had no wolf, no combat training worth a damn. Valus was a lethal veteran. Her movements smooth and deadly, even dressed in court finery. "She will not fight Cadrix," snarled, stepping in front of Nereal, shielding her with his body. "This is my war," Valus countered, eyes gleaming with vicious intelligence. "You said it yourself, she's your queen. The challenge is hers. If you intervene, you break the oldest law we have. You'll be named a tyrant, not a king. Your own guards will have to rise against you." It was a flawless trap. He was shackled by the rules he had sworn to uphold. Nereal stared at his back, the rigid tension in his powerful frame. He was trapped, but she wasn't. "Let me fight her," Wolf urged, its voice stronger, now sharpened by fear and adrenaline. "We'll die anyway. Let us die fighting." Nereal touched Cadrix's arm. He turned, anguish burning in his golden eyes. "I won't let you do this," he whispered fiercely. She met his gaze and shook her head. A page had retrieved the slate and set it at the foot of the dais. Nereal picked it up, her hand, unexpectedly steady. Chalk scratched across the surface in quick, certain strokes. She held it high for all to see. "I accept." The hall inhaled as one stunned. Cadrix stared at the words, then at her horror spreading across his face. "Nereal. No, you don't understand. She will kill you." Nereal simply nodded. She knew. But she wouldn't run, not again. Not back into the woods, not back into fear. She had something to fight for now. The pups, and the broken king who had impossibly tried to rebuild her world. Torvin stepped forward, pale. Terms of the trial must be declared. First blood or to the death. "To the death!" Valus hissed, lips curling into a feral grin. "The pack deserves a real alpha queen, not a shattered little trinket." The hall emptied. A circle formed. Torches were lit, throwing monstrous shadows across the stone. Nereal stood alone in the center, her midnight gown stark against Valus's crimson. Valus produced two wicked, curved daggers from hidden sheaths. Nereal had no weapon. The trial began. Valus didn't pounce. She circled her, savoring the moment, moving with a predator's lazy confidence. "You should have stayed in your hole, little mouse," she sneered. "The woods are where weak things go to die alone." Nereal stood perfectly still. Her heart hammered, but she kept her focus narrow. She didn't watch Valus's eyes or hands. She watched her feet, her hips, the tiny shifts of weight. Just as Cadrix had taught her how to read an opponent's intent before it struck. "She's overconfident," the wolf whispered. "She expects us to bolt. She expects us to fold. She'll aim high first. A throat strike to silence us for good. A desperate move, not a skilled one." Valus lunged. Nereal dropped low, rolling beneath the strike. The larger she-wolf stumbled, thrown off by the unexpected maneuver. Nereal scrambled back, gaining space. A frustrated growl tore from Velas. She was done playing. She charged a storm of steel and fury, driving Nereal backward step by step. One blade slashed across Nereal's arm. A hot slicing pain shot through her, and the scent of her blood filled the air thin human. Velas laughed. That's all you've got, Omega. I can smell the fear dripping off you. There's no wolf in you, nothing but a scared little girl. Velas lunged again. This time her strike was merciless, a straight thrust meant for Nereal's heart. Nereal twisted aside, but the dagger's tip slashed through her ribs, ripping fabric and flesh. A sharp cry tore from her as she staggered backward, her hand coming away slick with blood. The edges of her vision blurred. From the sidelines, Cadrix released a choked, ragged roar, held back only by the crushing weight of the crown and the ancient law binding him. His face was carved with raw agony, as Nereal collapsed to one knee, her blood pooling across the stone floor. Velas stood over her, like a vulture raising her dagger for the killing blow. It's over. Nereal. Thought despair closing around her like cold water. No. Her wolf's voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a roar, wild, furious, shaking the very core of her spirit. He will not take us. This monster will not destroy our family. The pain in her side, the fear, the desperation that every broken piece inside her fused into a single burning point of white-hot rage. The dormant creature inside her didn't simply wake. It detonated. A surge of power, untamed, blinding, burst from Nereal's body. It wasn't the grounded, controlled force of an alpha like Cadrix. It was silver feral, volatile lunar. The air snapped and crackled. Her pale hair lifted as if caught in a storm wind. When she raised her head to face Velas, her eyes were no longer soft, moonstone gray. They blazed pure, radiant silver. And then, for the first time in 5 brutal years, a sound tore from her throat. Not a word. A howl. A howl filled with everything she had swallowed. 5 years of agony. 5 years of fire. 5 years of silence. The howl of a wolf who had crawled out of the grave. The howl of a Luna Queen. Velas froze dagger inches from Nereal's heart, her face twisted into pure, paralyzing shock. The great hall went deathly still as Nereal's body began to shift, not into an ordinary wolf, but into something ancient, something legendary. Her bones stretched her form, shimmering, reshaping, until a massive wolf stood where a broken Omega had knelt. A creature breathtaking in its terror and beauty. Fur white as untouched snow. Towering size equal to Cadrix's own wolf. Eyes burning like twin silver stars, no one breathed. Her howl still echoed through the rafters like a ghost of forgotten power. Nereal now fully. Luna shook out her stunning pelt with a slow regal grace, the wound on her side sealed instantly under the silver glow of her new form. She wasn't just a wolf. She was Luna. A myth reborn. A bloodline thought extinct. A queen said to carry the moon's own heartbeat, binding and empowering her alpha and her pack. Velas stared at her, terror widening her eyes. The dagger slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered to the floor, the sound thunderous in the silence. She had challenged a wolfless Omega, and instead awakened a goddess of her ancestors. She stumbled back, her arrogance shattered beyond repair. Nereal lifted her massive head, her silver gaze locking onto Velas. A low growl thundered from her chest, not rage but judgment. A verdict. She didn't need to strike. Her presence alone pressed down on every wolf in the hall with crushing lunar force. They felt it in their bones, in their blood, in the core of their wolf spirits. Their Luna had returned. All around her, lower-ranking wolves dropped instinctively to their knees, heads bowed in absolute submission. From the edge of the circle, Cadrix watched, shock battling with an overwhelming rising pride. The void left by their severed bond suddenly ignited. Not with the old familiar warmth, but with a tidal wave of blinding silver radiance. It was her power, her essence broadcasting not through a narrow mate bond, but to the entire pack at once. And to him, her alpha, it felt like the sun rising over a dead world. He could feel everything, her strength, her fury, her triumph, flooding into him, fortifying him, anchoring him. He was no longer a king missing half his soul. He was an alpha standing beside his Luna, and the feeling was absolute, unbreakable, complete. At last, Valus broke. With a strangled whimper, Valus tried to run, but Nerael was faster. She didn't move with the heavy thunder of an alpha wolf. She moved like moonlight cutting across water, silent, swift, unreal. A white blur streaked across the stone floor, and suddenly, Nerael was simply there, materializing in Valus's path like a spirit summoned from the night. Valus skidded backward, scrambling on her palms and heels like a cornered animal. No, please. She choked every scrap of arrogance, stripped from her, revealing nothing but raw, pathetic fear. Nerael stepped forward, one slow, deliberate movement after another, herding Valus toward the twin thrones. The court watched spellbound by the silent predatory dance. Finally, Valus's back hit the cold stone, nowhere left to run. Nerael towered over her lunar power, burning in the air like static. She lowered her massive head until her muzzle hovered inches from Valus's trembling face. She could have ended it. One bite, one snap, justice delivered. The pack waited breathless for blood. Instead, Nerael exhaled a single soft breath that ruffled Valus's hair. A gesture of pure, devastating contempt. You are not worth the blood on my teeth. Then Nerael threw her head back and barked once sharp, commanding, Submit! Valus collapsed, instantly sobbing, flipping onto her back as she exposed her throat in total surrender. She was finished, broken beyond repair by a power she had never believed existed. Nerael turned away from her without another glance. She padded to the center of the hall, claws tapping lightly against the stone. She stood tall, surveying the pack, her pack claiming them without a single word. She looked at the loyal, at the disloyal, the fearful, and they bowed. All of them. Her gaze finally fixed on Cadrix. He hadn't moved, but his eyes, burning gold, held an emotion so fierce it nearly hurt to witness. Absolute devotion, awe, a love deeper than any bond fate could forge. She walked toward him, and the pack parted like a tide before her. She stopped just inches from him. Silver eyes met gold alpha, and Luna King and Queen, two forces powerful enough to reshape the world. Nerael nudged his hand with her muzzle. Soft, trusting, choosing him. Then her form began to shift. Her enormous Luna wolf dissolved into silver mist, reshaping into the woman beneath. Nerael stood naked in the torchlight, skin, luminous wounds healed completely. Her pale hair fell wild around her face, and her moon-bright eyes now held certainty, strength in quiet form, still silent. Her voice had not returned with her wolf, but she didn't need it anymore. Cadrix removed his heavy fur-lined cloak in one smooth motion and wrapped it around her shoulders. His hands lingered, reverent and almost shaking. Their eyes locked, and in that gaze a new bond formed. Not the old one stolen from them, but something stronger. A bond forged in fire, in blood, in victory, chosen not given. Cadrix leaned close, resting his forehead against hers. My queen, he breathed a vow, a prayer, a promise. Before Nerael could respond, a frantic shout pierced the hall. A guard, one assigned to the pups, stumbled through the entrance, face pale with terror. My king, the pups! He gasped, pointing wildly down the corridor, toward the royal chambers. They're gone. At that moment, a cold, unnatural wind ripped through the hall, snuffing out half the torches and plunging the room into jagged shadow. From the direction of the Queen's spire, a scent rolled through the air, cutting through fear and blood. Cold iron, grave dust, forbidden magic. The signature stench of the traitor who began it all. Morvac had made his move. He hadn't just orchestrated Velus's challenge. He had used the chaos to strike where it hurt most. He had come for the heirs, to finish what he started 5 years ago. 1 year later, Raya stood on the high balcony of the Queen's Spire, the same place that once felt like the edge of a gilded cage. Now it was simply where she watched the sunrise over her kingdom. The crisp morning breeze carried pine from the far forest and the warm scent of bread rising in the castle kitchens. Home hard-won, blood-won, finally hers. Cadrix stepped up behind her, his arms sliding around her waist, pulling her against the solid heat of his chest. He didn't speak. He simply rested his chin on her shoulder, his presence a quiet, steady anchor. Their bond had never magically returned. The curse blade had done its work with ruthless precision. But what they had built in its place was stronger by far. It was a bond woven through shared looks, the brush of fingers, the silent understanding between two souls who had walked through fire and chosen each other on the other side. A bond renewed every single day by choice, not fate. Below them, in the castle's main training yard, laughter rang out, bright, sharp, alive. Ruko, already broad-shouldered and carrying the early swagger of a future alpha, was showing Fiar, the visiting lord's son, how to grip a wooden practice sword. His voice was patient, his stance firm leadership already simmering under his skin. Zion, smaller and more slender, sat nearby with a thick leather-bound book open across his lap. His brows were knotted in focus. A strategist's mind, sharp as a blade, Voran's lineage in every thoughtful breath. Maya perched on the top rail of the fencing, sleek and dark-eyed, her gaze tracking every movement. Protective, calculating, her instincts pulsed like her mother's silent, watchful ready. The pups were no longer pups. They were young wolves now, thriving under the joint training of the weapon masters, Hadron and Korgon, and under Cadrix himself. But their true sanctuary, the place they returned to every night, was still with her. They crawled into her bed, seeking her scent, her calm, her warmth. Their heartbeats against hers a rhythm older than memory. The hunt for Morvac had been swift and merciless. With her Luna senses awakened, Nurael had tracked his foul magic in ways Cadrix's most skilled trackers never could. She led the hunt herself, silent, white, unstoppable. Cadrix, a black shadow at her flank. They cornered Morvac in the ruins of a forgotten mountain stronghold, the same place he had murdered Cadrix's brother. He had not stolen the pups to kill them, they discovered. He meant to use them, twist their royal blood in a dark ritual meant to corrupt the throne itself. The battle was short. Morvac's twisted sorcery crumbled under the combined power of an Alpha King and a Luna Queen. It was Nirael who delivered the final judgment, silent, silver-eyed, while Cadrix exacted the last stroke of justice. They returned to the Onyx Citadel with the air safe again and Morvac's head on a pike, a warning to anyone who dared threaten the heirs or their kingdom. The court had changed. The vipers had been exposed and gutted, Velus stripped of tidal broken in body, and pride was banished to a remote northern convent, her name erased from the Pack's archives. In their place, a new court rose built on loyalty, on strength, on the kind of character ambition alone could never mimic. And at the heart of it all stood a silent queen, whose single glance carried more authority than Velus ever wielded with her venomous tongue. Nirael still used her slate, but rarely now. She had forged a language with Cadrix and the young wolves, a language of signs, expressions, touches. A conversation carried on the wind between hearts, tethered by experience rather than magic. Her silence was no longer a wound. It was her identity, her power. Her Luna lived within her now, a constant presence under her skin, steady as breath. Her shift came easily, fluidly, as natural as stepping through a doorway. Some nights, under a full moon, she and Cadrix ran together, black and white. Two halves of a whole, racing through the ancient forest that had once been her prison. Now it was simply another piece of her story. Cadrix's thumb brushed the back of her hand, pulling her gently from memory. He turned her in his arms. His golden eyes softened in the pale morning light. He had changed too. The haunted, grieving king was gone, replaced by a man at peace, grounded, anchored by her. The scar across his face looked less like violence and more like a mark of the warrior she loved. He lowered his head and kissed her slow, deep, full of unspoken promises and the quiet triumph of survival. A kiss that whispered, "We made it. We're home." When he finally drew back, a small smile tugged at his lips. He reached into his tunic and pulled out something small, delicate, a bright blue bell. Its color stunned against his calloused palm. He tucked it gently behind her ear, threading it through her snow-white hair. Her breath hitched. The memory, once fractured and painful, came back with perfect clarity. A sunlit market, a young warrior with golden eyes, a girl with white hair braided in bluebells, a moon petal charm traded with a shy promise, a future burned but not destroyed, only waiting. Tears welled not from sorrow, but from a joy that filled every silent corner of her heart. She lifted a hand to his scarred cheek, telling him everything without a single word. "I remember." Cadrix covered her hand with his own, his thumb stroking her skin. "Welcome home, my moonbeam," he whispered, his voice a warm rumble. "Welcome home." And as the sun rose over the mountains, spilling gold across their kingdom, the silent queen smiled, her heart finally whole.